How Doraemon changed our perception of mythology. A long time ago, many people believed, and strongly believe, in all the stories and folklore going on in society. But, along with the progress of the times and the development of culture, more and more people are skeptical of things that are mythical, mythological, and everything related to the folklore. People are divided into two large groups: people who do not believe in myths, and the people who remain firmly believe in all the stories. Especially in Japan, can be said to be quite unique, where most Japanese people do not really believe in their religious mythology. But in certain situations or at certain events, they can change course, become very confident in those beliefs. Yes, by definition, myth is a folklore that spreads massively from one individual to another, and survive for generations, as well as believe the truth, although sometimes no evidence can accompany the stories. That's why most people living in modern times, like me and all of us, usually not too confident things related to myths, because it is not in accordance with logic and also coupled with the absence of evidence that accompanies the stories. Try to imagine who in the present still believes that Zeus as the god of lightning really exists. I'm sure the majority of us don't believe that person. Then the question is, why did people in the past believe that? Are they stupid to believe such a thing? Obviously not, because this is a clear proof that humans are intelligent in every era. Why? If we compare it to animals, animals do not recognize such beliefs and mythological mythologies. Why? Because animal intelligence is lower than human intelligence. And the Doraemon series seem to know about it. If you guys are fanatical enough to follow this series, be it the serial filler, nor the adventure series, I am very familiar with the concept of a story where Doraemon, back to the past, and it is because of that action that ultimately makes a chain of causality, alias a cause and effect of an event that occurs in the present. As an example, in the series, Doraemon is told to go to the past, and was considered a god because of its strange shape. At that time, he traveled on an ordinary bicycle, but for people in the past who didn't know the bike, they consider Doraemon is driving a very, very magical vehicle. That's why he was considered a god, and the god is riding the clouds. That's the story. Not just the series. In the adventure series too, there are some stories, as happened in the story of adventure in the land of migratory birds. It turns out that the mythological stories of birdmen that exist in the real world, Doraemon is said to have happened because the Birdman actually existed, but not because of a supernatural thing, miracle, or whatever it's called. But it happened because of an activity undertaken by a professor who recklessly advanced the evolution of birds into birdmen, as well as the story of the evolution of dinosaurs that occurred in the world, where it is told that the young Putellan fish could evolve into dinosaurs is due to the act of Doraemon and Nobita, who illuminated the fish with a flashlight accelerating evolution. Yes, to the point, Doraemon seems to change our perception of mythology, where the actual mythology makes absolutely no sense. But in the point of view of the story of Doraemon, this myth can be explained logically. Yeah, the concept that the author of this series is trying to explain, Fujiko F. Fujio, as if answering the question at the beginning of about why ancient people could believe mythology. Not as simple as the answer, yeah, 'cause they're dumb, or other similar answers. but they can believe it is because of that. Actually happened, but with a different visual. Doraemon is considered a god because of its shape, and because he was riding a bicycle that was completely unseen by people in the old. So he was regarded as a god riding the flying clouds. Of such a basic concept, we could say that Zeus actually existed, but with a different visualization. And this is actually very much in line with the teachings of Islam. Yes, if we look for the history of idolatry that occurred in this world, at first, all those idolatries, behind or at first, start with something very, very simple. At first, the idols are actually the people who actually exist and have ever existed in the world. The idols were actually made in honor of the philanthropists of the past when they had died. But as time went on, year after year changed, time after time changing, and the stories of generous people and the pious people constantly being told, and told his honor to posterity and their descendants. As time goes by, the idols are worshipped like God. Because it happened finally, idolatry worship that exists in the history of mankind. The same story can happen in Greek mythology, as does Zeus and his friends, where they are actually the original people who once existed in the world. But after their death, heroic stories about them. Why can I say the concept of this Doraemon series is pretty reasonable and very real to apply in real life? Because this really exists and happens in research. One example is the research of the dragon story, which turned out to be an animal. Yes, dragons are animals anyway, but what I mean is, which we know as dragons in the mythology of some cultures in the world, actually is animal Komodo. Yes, rare animals that only live on the island of Komodo, but the poets and writers of the past give it its own seasoning, where the dragons are told can release fire. And it can also fly, a hyperbolic concept in a literary order, and is also a special feature of its own, of writing stories that people in ancient. Then the question is, if we assume all those mythological stories comes from real things happening in the world, how does man know God and all other unseen things? Yes, with all those concepts, we can conclude that people get information about God, corner, and all other supernatural things must be from something real. Considering the animals in their instincts do not know God at all. And this also, supported by a statement from a book author named Karen Armstrong, that all religions come from the same tree. Yes, in other words, all religions come from one thought. And that's why it makes sense why there are some characters in the Nordic stories, for example, which is also quite the same and familiar with the stories that occur in the story of Islamic teachings. There is also a story, other examples such as the story in the Epic of Babylon. It is almost similar to the story in the Jewish scriptures. Those are some of the examples. This to be quite plausible, because in truth, people cannot create something without reference, because that's how come man knew that lightning was created Zeus, whereas humans themselves at the time haven't found any electricity at all and don't know what lightning is yet. Instead, they worship lightning. They instead worshipped Zeus as the god who created lightning. This is so weird, right? What can we think of from this phenomenon? Yes, if we take the theory from the point of view of the stories in the Doraemon series. Could have been Zeus was actually an electrical scientist living in the future? But he goes back in time, so it was considered a god by the Greeks. This is like the story of the abominable bird contained in the stories of the Islamic religious book, where it says in the story, "In the letter all feel." It was said that the abominable bird carried a stone from hell and cast the stones to the elephant team Abraha. As we know that the language of the Quran is like a literary language full of many figurative and illustration, like any other literary. What if we could imagine that it could actually be, right? F-16 fighters that go back in time. Yes, the same theory can also be applied to the story of one of the followers of the prophet Solomon who moved the palace of the Queen of Belkis in one blink of an eye. It makes perfect sense if he uses tools in the future to do so. Yeah, who knows? Okay, maybe our discussion today about Islamic teachings in the anime series Doraemon may be useful to you guys. And don't forget to also like, subscribe, and if there is criticism and advice you can give at Forum Egology. Link in the description. And word assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Inshallah we meet again in the next videos.